Staff Sergeant Adrian. Cole had never imagined this kind of humiliation. Paraded through a crowded cabin, stripped of his first-class seat like excess luggage, and dumped into economy while a row of Navy officers traded smug grins and muttered about how logistics guys didn't deserve the same respect as combat elite. But when turbulence turned deadly over the Atlantic, and alarms screamed through the fuselage, those smirks disappeared. Silence fell like a curtain, and when the cockpit door burst open mid-chaos, the SEAL pilot didn't call for them, he called for him. Before I reveal what unfolded at 30,000 feet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's dive in. The mist at Heathrow clung to the runway like breath on cold glass. Slow and stubborn, refusing to lift. Staff Sergeant Adrian Cole moved through Terminal 3 with deliberate calm, his olive duffel slung high across one shoulder, boots muted on polished tile. His posture was precise but unremarkable, calculated that way. Regulation haircut, plain jacket, no shine, no flair. Nothing about him drew eyes, and that suited him fine. His boarding pass read Row 29A Economy. No surprises there. At the gate, the scanner chirped twice. The attendant's smile was automatic as she slid him a new slip. Complimentary upgrade, sir. Seat 3C. Adrian hesitated, brows flicking upward. Appreciate it, he said, voice even, and walked on without ceremony. First class felt different the moment he crossed the curtain. Softer leather, air scented faintly of citrus and clean linen. He slid into 3C, stowed his duffel neatly under the footrest, and pulled out a dog-eared book on ancient warfare. This should have been the quiet part. It wasn't. Across the aisle, two men had clocked him the second he sat down. They weren't subtle. Late 30s, squared jaws, those barely grown-out high and tights that screamed recent deployment. Naval insignia glinted under cuffed sleeves, a class ring flashing, as one lifted his glass. Officers, the kind who believed first class was there. Birthright. What's his deal? One murmured, low but not low enough. His buddy's laugh clinked against ice. Looks like somebody pulled strings for morale points. Admin type, maybe. Paper pusher gets a leather seat while the guys who earned it sit cramped. Adrian didn't look up. Pages turned with mechanical calm, but his ears caught every word. He'd heard variations before, in chow halls, motor pools, anywhere lines blurred between who fixed the fight and who fought it. One officer wasn't done. He flagged a flight attendant as she passed, tone polite but edged. Excuse me, are you certain the seating's correct? First class is usually for actual rank or paying passengers. Just seems off. Eyes shifted. A businessman adjusted his tie, gaze dropping fast. The attendant's practiced smile strained, caught between uniforms and protocol. She crouched by Adrian's seat, voice low, apologetic. Sir, I'm terribly sorry. Looks like there's been an error with your assignment. We'll need you to return to your original seat. Adrian closed the book slowly, marking his place with the boarding pass. His eyes met hers, not accusing, just level. She wasn't the enemy, just trapped by procedure. No problem, he said quietly and stood. The officers tracked him like predators satisfied with the kill. One smirked toward his glass. Some people just don't understand the difference between support and command. The other chuckled deep in his throat. Throw a uniform on and suddenly they think they're somebody. Ripples moved through the cabin, small whispers, darted glances, curated judgment. Adrian walked on without answering. Down the aisle to row 29, where economy squeezed strangers shoulder to shoulder. Overhead bins bulged, armrests bruised. He forced his duffel beneath the seat and folded himself into the narrow frame. Nearby passengers avoided looking his way, but their curiosity hummed like static. They'd seen the swap, heard the tone, stitched together their own narrative. Adrian stared out the oval window, expression carved from stone. The humiliation didn't flare hot. It sank heavy, like lead in his gut. It wasn't new weight. He'd carried worse through years of proving, himself in systems built for someone else. Still it pressed as the aircraft pushed back, engines rumbling. The wrong lingered like turbulence, unseen but constant. The plane clawed into gray cloud, engines steadying into the Atlantic rhythm. England fell away below, stitched fields shrinking to green squares, then vanishing under mist. The cabin softened into a hush, laptops glowing, conversations murmuring, drink carts creaking up aisles. No one looked at him now, and that was fine. He'd been unseen before, spent his life in shadows beside cockpits. Wrench in hand, the name no one remembered until a system bled pressure mid-flight. Invisibility was easy. What wasn't easy was swallowing that quiet stone of humiliation. As the hours stretched ahead, He opened his book again, eyes scanning lines without reading. Because his mind wasn't on Rome, it kept drifting forward toward the cockpit, where during boarding, the captain had stood for a moment in the galley doorway. Most passengers barely glanced at the man up front before returning to their drinks. But Adrian Cole wasn't most passengers. His eyes registered details like a camera lens, even when his face gave nothing away. The wings stitched above the left breast pocket were standard issue for pilots, silver, regulation, nothing unusual there. But above them, tucked like a secret most would overlook, a small gold insignia caught the light, a trident. SEALs didn't wear those unless they'd earned them in blood. Adrian had seen only a few in his entire career, always pinned to men whose reputations walked into the room before they did. Laughter rolled back from first class in lazy waves, too loud to be private. The same two Navy officers who'd gotten him bumped were already on their second round of whiskey, voices booming over the constant hum of the engines. Biggest issue with today's military? One said, punctuating his point with a sweep of amber liquid. Too many paper warriors. Whole damn ranks of them. Mechanics, clerks, tech support, all pretending they belong in the fight. His companion nodded with mock solemnity. Bet the one we sent packing couldn't break down a rifle without Google. Probably calls roadside assistance when his Jeep won't start. Laughter spread across the surrounding seats like static. Adrian kept his gaze fixed on the clouds outside, jaw steady. He'd learned years ago some conversations weren't worth entering, especially when they were really monologues, looking for validation, not truth. The aircraft shuddered gently, making ice cubes clink in expensive glasses. A ripple of turbulence, nothing unusual for the North Atlantic, but Adrian felt it differently. To him, it wasn't random bumps. It was a whisper from the metal itself, the minute lag in the left engine's rhythm, the fractional delay in wing flex. Machines had languages. He'd spent half his life learning to speak them, and this one was starting a conversation he didn't like. An hour later, cruising altitude painted a false picture of calm. The seatbelt sign dimmed out. Lights softened into night mode. Passengers curled under airline blankets. Screens glowing with half-watched movies. Somewhere behind him, someone snored softly. Attendants moved up and down the aisles in practiced choreography. Adrian closed his eyes but didn't sleep. Never did on flights, not really. Muscle memory from years of transport hops. Where closing your eyes, too. Long meant missing the single wrong sound that came before a disaster. So he listened with more than ears. The first warning wasn't sound. It was smell. Buried beneath brewed coffee and lemon disinfectant came a thread of something. Harsher. Burnt insulation. Acrid and chemical. To most noses, it blended into the generic airplane smell. To Adrian, it was a red flare in the dark, wiring under heat stress. Then the sound came. Subtle, almost imperceptible, a hitch in the left engine's song, disguised under the deep drone of its twin. But he'd spent too many years teasing meaning out of machinery to mistake it. That wasn't turbulence. That was hesitation. His head turned toward the wing. To an untrained eye, everything looked fine. To him, the pattern in the flex was just wrong. So was the thin gray smear in the exhaust trail. Then came the vibration. Gentle, steady, threading through the fuselage. Not random. Not weather. Mechanical fatigue. Overhead bins rattled softly. A baby let out a thin wail 3 rows back, and then the lights flickered. Not a quick blink, 2 long pulses that dragged eyes up from glowing screens, pried people out of their movie dazes. Unease spread like fog. Adrian's hands curled slowly against the armrests. The intercom popped alive, but before the captain spoke, a thin ribbon of gray smoke began snaking from the vents above first class. Not a lot. Just enough to thread panic through the cabin air along with that bitter, unmistakable smell. Reactions were immediate. Heads craned. Voices sharpened. "Is that smoke?" Someone blurted, higher pitched than intended. Flight attendants appeared instantly, moving too quickly to look casual. One gave the line, cheerful on the surface, cracking underneath. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're investigating a minor technical issue." Her painted-on smile didn't reach her eyes. Adrian's pulse did the opposite of what most people's would. It slowed. Years of training did that. When the world tilted into chaos, you carved calm from instinct and drilled habits. He drew a long breath, cataloging what his senses fed him. No raw fuel smell. Good. No fire popping in the cabin. Better. But the insulation scent was getting sharper, and that meant a fight inside the walls where nobody could reach. Then the aircraft lurched hard enough to spill. Half-finished drinks and slam. Overhead bins. One popped, dumping a laptop bag to the floor with a thud. Someone screamed. The baby's cry cracked into full-throated panic. First class wasn't calm anymore. The two officers were on their feet, fear stripping every ounce of arrogance from their faces. What the hell's happening? One barked at an attendant, voice cracking. Why haven't we turned back yet? Panic didn't wear rank. It leveled everyone the same. The PA crackled again, this time with the captain's voice. Calm. Too calm. That measured cadence pilots use to keep passengers from imagining. Flames licking the fuselage. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing technical difficulties and running through our checklist. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened while we resolve this situation. The message ended, and the silence it left was heavier than the smoke. Whispers spread like infection. Engine fire. Electrical failure. We're going down. Adrian sat motionless. Every sense locked on data. The uneven note in the left engine, now loud enough for untrained ears. The sluggish lag when the plane corrected against the headwind. The way her bones shivered not from weather but from strain. The metallic groan was faint but unmistakable, a deep, stressed vibration running through the skeleton of the aircraft. Not random turbulence. Not a nuisance glitch. This was failure stacking on failure. The kind of domino collapse that could drag a plane out of the sky if ignored for too long. Emergency manuals covered pieces of this, but not all of it. Adrian knew that truth in his bones because he'd lived it. Different skies. Different birds. A Chinook choking back over Helmand with one engine screaming for mercy. An Apache flickering blind when a surge roasted half its avionics mid-run. Both times, survival had boiled down to calm voices and dirty-knuckled decisions by people who spoke the language of machines under duress. Now that language was whispering in his ear again, and the words weren't good. 10 minutes crawled like a century. The acidic tang of scorched wiring spread despite the air system straining on high. Passengers sat locked stiff in their seats, every flicker of the lights jerking heads upward in silent question. The left engine's cadence kept breaking stride. Wrong. Notes in what should have been an unbroken song. Flight attendants worked the aisles, smiles lacquered on like stage paint. Clipboards in hand, eyes sharp as they executed quiet protocols that weren't about comfort anymore. They were bracing the cabin, securing latches, scanning for passengers who'd need help if the worst came calling, sliding emergency gear within reach without making it look obvious. Then something happened. Adrian had never seen at 35,000 feet. On a civilian flight, the cockpit door unlocked and swung wide. Captain Damien stepped out and the air changed. He wasn't towering, but he moved like gravity answered to him. Shoulders squared under a uniform, still knife-creased. Despite the pressure boiling behind that calm exterior, close-cropped gray, weather-lined skin that told 1,000 sky stories. His presence alone widened the narrow aisle, commanding a hush that rolled forward like a bow wave. His eyes swept the cabin, quick, calculating, taking in the whole scene with the ruthless efficiency of a man who didn't waste seconds on the irrelevant. First class pounced. One of the Navy officers, Whiskey Courage, still sloshing, lunged to his feet like a starving wolf scenting weakness. Captain, what the hell is going on? This is unacceptable. Why haven't you turned us around? The second officer joined in, voice cracking under the strain. Damien didn't slow, didn't blink. His glance hit them like a blade, cold, clinical, final. They choked off mid-sentence, left standing like reprimanded cadets. And then his gaze slid past them, piercing down the length of economy, cutting through faces, until it locked on the one man who hadn't been whispering or panicking, Staff Sergeant Cole. Adrian's head snapped up. Hearing his rank spoken here, in that voice, was like an electric jolt wired straight to his spine. Yes, sir, he said, slow and careful, because his mind was already racing. Damien's tone didn't ask. It verified. Army Aviation Maintenance. Fixed and rotary wing. Combat service logged. Adrian's throat was desert dry. That's correct, sir. But how? The manifest tells me what I need, Damien clipped back. His words carried no fluff, just hard steel urgency. Right now, I've got a situation in that cockpit no manual's written for. And I need eyes and hands that know the difference between a schematic and reality. Someone who's pulled a bird out of hell with tools and instinct. That someone is you. The hush that fell over the rows could have drowned out the engines. Every passenger's head tilted, prayers swallowed. Ears tuned to a conversation that sounded like a verdict, salvation or doom. The Navy officers scrambled upright again, indignation sparking hot enough to scorch through their fear. Hold on just a damn second, one started, voice tight. He's not cleared for... Damien pivoted on them so fast the air itself seemed to shear. Staff Sergeant Cole has more hours under turbine strain than my entire deck crew combined, Damien said, voice like locked steel doors. He's wrenched systems back from the dead in combat. Zones that would make this aircraft curl up and die. You want to save this flight? Sit your asses down, shut your mouths, and let me work with someone who knows reality over theory. The impact hit first class like a shockwave. Smirks collapsed. Faces blanched. Whatever words were cued behind their teeth died there. Silence crushed them flat. The men who had spent hours treating him like background noise now stood silent, discarded by the one voice that carried real authority. Every eye in the cabin swung toward Adrian Cole. He could feel the shift in atmosphere, perceptions, rewriting themselves in real time. The quiet man from row 29A wasn't so invisible anymore. Captain Damien didn't bother with ceremony. His hand shot out, firm and urgent. Staff Sergeant, with me now. Training took control before thought had the chance. Cole unbuckled, rose from the cramped seat, and moved into the aisle with purpose sharpened by muscle memory. Conversations fractured into whispers behind him, some shocked, some fearful, others steeped in regret for every smirk and joke thrown his way earlier. He passed the Navy officers without a glance, though both stood rigid and silent, their cheeks burning crimson, eyes locked on their boots. For the first time since takeoff, they were out of words. Damien guided him forward through the narrow aisle, past the curtain that divided passengers from crew, toward the sealed threshold of the cockpit. When that heavy door shut behind them, the outside world ceased to exist. Only alarms remained, shrill, overlapping tones designed to claw at human instincts, demanding action. The cockpit was a furnace of light and sound, warning, strobes hammering across panels, painting everything in pulsing reds and amber shades that screamed too late to anyone who didn't know better. Displays glared with cascading failures, hydraulic pressure bleeding out, engine temps climbing like rockets, and an autopilot that wasn't just offline, it was dead. This wasn't turbulence. This was the prelude to headlines. Captain Damien dropped into the left seat, his jaw like iron, while Lieutenant Victor Hale hunched over the central console, sweat streaking his brow despite the chilled airflow. Multiple failures, Damien barked over the chaos. Redundant systems gone, autopilot's a corpse. Left engines choking. Hydraulics are draining faster than backups can compensate. Every checklist fails. Everything we trust broken. Victor spun halfway, his eyes flashing irritation and fear in equal measure. Sir, with respect, he's a passenger. This isn't protocol. Damien's voice cracked like a rifle shot. Protocol doesn't matter if we hit the ocean. I need someone who's lived inside these guts, not just read a manual. Adrian slid into the tiny observer jump seat, pulling the harness tight across his chest. Space was suffocating, heat pressing in with the bitter tang of scorched circuits. But he'd worked in worse holes with worse odds. His eyes didn't chase alarms. They hunted patterns, the rhythm inside the noise. Your portside thermal sensor's lying, he said after a beat, voice steady. Data says thermal stress, but it's electrical interference. If you throttle down based on that, you'll kill the engine completely. Adrian leaned in, eyes dissecting the pressure array. Hydraulic leak's not where the system thinks it is. Crossfeed valve is half open, dumping. Pressure into the wrong circuit and confusing the diagnostics. You reroute through auxiliary and override manually. You'll hold rudder authority long enough to land. Victor's head snapped up, hesitation flickering. Sir! Do it, Damien ordered without looking back. Victor's fingers blurred across the controls, implementing the override. Pressure indicators stopped bleeding red. Rudder response returned. For the first time in 20 minutes, the plane wasn't a coffin on wings. Jesus, Victor breathed. How did you... I've patched this exact cascade on a C-130 during a combat evac, Adrian said simply. Different bird. Same physics. Steel doesn't care where you are, Afghanistan or the Atlantic. Damien finally turned to him, really turned, eyes steady, respect replacing urgency. Staff Sergeant, you're not stepping out of this cockpit until we're wheels down. Understood? Crystal clear, sir. The next hour stretched into something timeless, a relentless pattern of threats and narrow escapes. Adrian tracked a subtle fuel flow disparity that the diagnostics had failed to flag, recalibrated a faulty gyro using raw manual data when the instruments started contradicting themselves, and narrated stress load behaviors like a surgeon reading a failing heartbeat. Every correction felt like taping over cracks in a dam. Behind those quick fixes, The jet itself seemed to whisper of collapse. This wasn't a single fault. It was a network of malfunctions piling up into a scenario airframe designers swore should never happen, cascading, overlapping failures. Damien didn't waste a heartbeat. His decision was a blade through fog. Keflavik, NATO strip. Extended runway, crash cruise ready. 90 minutes. 90 minutes with one engine faltering, hydraulics limping on emergency bypass, and a North Atlantic storm massing like a wall of steel ahead. Outside, nature turned feral. Lightning lashed the horizon in jagged blue scars, strobing the cockpit with ghost light as thunder rolled like artillery fire. Adrian's gaze bounced between failing gauges and storm-glass darkness, feeding instructions in clipped, urgent bursts. Throttle steady, ignore those spikes. Those hydraulics now. 20% cushion before crossfeed shears off. Then turbulence struck like a hammer. The aircraft dropped savagely, pitching bodies against harnesses. In the cabin, overhead bins spat luggage, screams clawed through the roar. "Holder level!" Victor barked, white-knuckled on the yoke as it bucked like a living thing. Damien's tone cut through the chaos, calm, honed steel. "Don't fight it! Flow with it." "Adrian, status!" The jet convulsed under them, metal bones shuddering. Adrian read stress curves like he'd done in war zones, riding into Afghan valleys in battered transports. His voice was steady, not soft, steady like a spine holding everything together. "She's braking left, engine torque is erratic. Counter 2 degrees starboard. Bleed some pressure through the bypass. Stop muscling her, let the frame flex. She was built for abuse like this." Damien adjusted, fingers light, no brute force, coaxing instead of commanding. Slowly, agonizingly, the jet leveled into something like stability. Still shaking, but no longer ready to rip apart. Through curtains of sleet, the Icelandic coast crawled into sight, jagged stone, teeth gnawing at a steel gray sea. The runway lights winked like dying fireflies beyond sheets of rain. "Gear down," Damien ordered. The command set off a chorus of warnings. Alarms shrieking crimson, hydraulics grinding like bones in a vise. Panels bloomed with amber and red as if the console had caught fire. Adrian slammed a hand onto manual release. "Hydraulics aren't playing ball. Gravity drop now." The gear crashed into position with a sickening metallic clunk, the kind that said barely locked. 3 green bulbs winked on, but the pressure readouts bled numbers that tasted like failure. "Locked and verified," Victor choked out, every syllable tight as wire. Rain slashed at the windscreen like 1,000 knives. The approach light strobed past in manic flashes. Ground looked close, but also like a distant promise. "This won't be pretty," Damien warned. And the words hadn't cooled before the runway slammed into them. Impact. The jet struck hard enough to wrench shouts from lungs and drag. Harnesses tight across ribs. It bounced once, violently, then the tires found grip. Wheels screamed. Smoke poured from the brakes like ghost fire as Damien wrestled the beast to centerline. Straight, alive, engines roared in reverse thrust, screaming like wounded beasts as the aircraft fought physics with sheer mechanical defiance. The entire fuselage shuddered under the brutal deceleration, metal groaning as if trying to tear itself apart. Each vibration rattled through bones and rivets alike. It wasn't a landing. It was a controlled collision with Earth. The jet clawed at the soaked runway, hydroplaning for breathless seconds before tires finally bit into slick asphalt. The smell of scorched rubber and burning brakes filled the cockpit as the beast grudgingly surrendered its speed. Then stillness. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the hollow tick of cooling alloys and the relentless percussion of rain hammering aluminum skin. 10 seconds that stretched forever. 10 seconds where no one dared speak, as if breaking the silence might jinx survival. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted behind them, clapping hands, sobs tearing loose from throats, laughter pitched so high it bordered on hysteria, relief, raw and violent. They were alive. All of them. Captain Damien Rorn exhaled slowly, his hands loosening from the controls like they weighed 1,000 pounds. His voice came low, steady, an anchor against the storm that still raged outside. Engines off. Each motion was deliberate as he shut them down, his fingers brushing switches with a surgeon's care. When the final hum died and silence fell, he turned his head. Through rain-streaked glass, lightning flickered like silent artillery, throwing shadows across their faces. His gaze found Staff Sergeant Adrian Cole. For a moment, neither spoke. The bond was forged in that quiet, the kind that never needs words. Finally, Damien broke it. "Staff Sergeant," he said, voice rough with something that didn't exist in checklists or handbooks. "That landing isn't mine alone. That's in your logbook, too." Cole held his eyes, water glinting on his lashes like sweat, or maybe something more human. He nodded once. A silent acknowledgement. No speeches. No heroics. Just mutual understanding born in the fire of survival. Emergency crews swarmed seconds later. A ballet of flashing reds and whites against the drowning blackness. Fire trucks crouched like metal beasts at the aircraft's flanks, their nozzles steaming under rain that turned tarmac into a silver lake. Sirens wailed. Voices barked orders in clipped staccato. The storm didn't care. It kept beating its fists on steel and glass, trying to finish what it had started. When the cabin door finally cracked open, a blast of Icelandic cold slapped through like punishment and mercy all at once. The air smelled of kerosene, ozone, and raw survival. Cole stepped, out first, boots splashing into shallow pools, rain clawing at his jacket as if trying to pull him back. He paused under the wing, lifting his eyes to the machine that had carried them through hell. The bird looked small now, small and scarred, paint stripped in streaks, aluminum dimpled by stress that no blueprint had ever accounted for. It was beautiful in its brokenness, a warhorse that had been ridden hard and still stood. "Staff Sergeant." He turned. Captain Damien was striding toward him through the storm, his silhouette carved from iron and rain. His uniform was drenched, hair plastered to his skull, but command radiated from him like heat. And then, without hesitation, without waiting for formality, he came to attention. In the middle of chaos, sirens, shouting, and gawking civilians, he snapped his hand up in a salute as sharp as a blade. It wasn't theater. It wasn't regulation. It was a soldier's truth. Respect earned the hard way. The effect was nuclear. Ground crews froze mid-motion. Paramedics halted with stretchers half raised. Passengers descending the stairs stopped dead, their chatter evaporating into stunned silence. Even the rain seemed to pull back for half. A breath as Captain Damien Rorn saluted the staff, sergeant who had just stared down death and refused to blink. Cole returned it. Perfect form, rain streaming from his sleeve, pooling at his boots. 12 years of training flowed through his spine. But this was the moment those years were made for. When the salute dropped, the world resumed, but quieter, different. Behind them, 2 Navy officers stood rigid near the stairwell, uniforms clinging to their frames, expressions carved in shame. Their eyes met Cole's just long enough to speak, the truth they'd never say out loud. They had underestimated him. They'd measured rank and missed worth. And now, the storm wrote its verdict in silver rain, while a scarred bird rested on black. Ice and men learned what survival really costs. He offered a rigid nod, the kind people give when pride and apology collide. And words won't come. The other avoided eye contact entirely, staring at his boots as if the answers to all his discomfort were stitched into the laces. But Adrian didn't waste a second on either of them. Validation from men who had already revealed their true measure held no value now. Respect wasn't granted, it was reclaimed, earned through action when pressure stripped away pretense. He swung his duffel over one shoulder, water sheeting off the soaked canvas, and started toward the glow of terminal lights, shimmering through the downpour, a beacon of heat, dry clothes, and the kind of ordinary comfort that felt extraordinary after 90 minutes wondering if he'd ever see such things again. Behind him, the jet loomed in the darkness, haloed by rotating emergency lights and slick with rain, a silent monument to survival. Tomorrow, specialists would crawl over every system, record every fault, and assemble technical reports destined for safety briefings and case studies. But no document could capture the reality of those moments. The razor-thin space where textbook theory gives way to instinct, where every hour of hard-earned expertise converges into split-second decisions that keep metal aloft when logic insists it should fall. He'd carried the sting of humiliation earlier, marched out of first class like a stowaway while armchair warriors impressed. Uniforms traded smug jokes about support guys who didn't belong with the real operators. That weight was gone now, left somewhere in the black Atlantic between chaos and control. Because when alarms screamed and metal shook and 200 lives dangled over oblivion, no one questioned who belonged in that cockpit. He'd earned that space the same way he'd earned every victory. Through relentless mastery of his craft and a quiet resolve to act without expecting applause. The terminal loomed closer, its windows glowing amber, promising steaming coffee, warm air, and the unremarkable. comforts that become miracles when measured against the memory of disaster. But Adrian's mind wasn't on vindication or payback, or the smug faces of men now humbled by silence. It was on a sound, a deep mechanical groan that turned into a steady hum. The moment the engines answered his hands, the way the controls steadied when he diverted the pressure lines, the instant when a machine on the edge of failure decided to hold together. Because someone knew exactly how to speak its language, that silent dialogue between human instinct and mechanical, heartbeats spoken through torque, hydraulic flow and flickering circuits. That was his home ground. Not first class. Not economy. Not in any artificial rank that strangers used to judge worth. He belonged in the fight against entropy, where broken things demanded someone stubborn enough to drag them back from the brink. And when the stakes rose high enough, when survival itself hung on a thread, that's precisely the moment men like Captain Damien turned and called for him. So let me ask you, if you'd witnessed someone treated that way during boarding, what would you have done? Would you have trusted the staff sergeant when the pilot summoned him into the cockpit? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one because your take matters here. And if this story reminded you that real skill doesn't always wear the stripes people expect, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss what's next. Share this with someone who understands that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding the answer everyone needs most. More stories about unseen heroes are waiting on your screen right now. Click one and keep the momentum alive, because I'll be back tomorrow with another truth. Courage doesn't always speak loudly. Until then, remember, sometimes the one they push to the back is the only one capable of bringing everyone home.